This program is part of Anchor's 2020 annual conference, one of many opportunities offered to Anchor members throughout the year. Anchor is the American network of community options and resources. Learn more about Anchor and explore membership benefits and options at anchor.org. We hope you enjoy today's session.
Good afternoon, everyone. I see that there are several people just joining us. So certainly we are excited to have so many people logging on today for the last session of day 2 of Anchor's 2020 virtual annual conference. My name is Sean Lichtenfeld. I'm the communications director for Anchor, and I am excited to welcome everybody to Building Partnerships with Families, Breaking Down Barriers. Before I introduce today's presenter, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping notes with everyone so that everybody can have an enjoyable conference experience. First of all, closed captioning is available for this session. To view the captions, you simply select the closed caption option from the Zoom control panel, which is accessible to you if you hover over the bottom of your Zoom app, and you should see it right there. Second, please use the Q&A feature rather than the chat feature to share any questions that you have with our presenter today. Later on in the hour, when we get to the end of Cindy's presentation, I will be posing some of your questions to Cindy. And if you are unable to ask questions, or if you ask a question but we don't have time to answer your question, don't worry, we will certainly find all of the questions that are in the Q&A box, and we will make sure that we share those afterwards so that Cindy can follow up with you if appropriate. And third and finally, I wanted to remind everybody that the video recording and slides from this session will be made available after the event. So stay tuned for an announcement from Anchor about when that will be available. Because we are recording today's session, that means all participants are in listen-only mode. You will be muted. So if at any point you have any questions or you have any troubleshooting needs, you are certainly welcome to use the chat box to get in touch with any of today's panelists. And like I mentioned, you should send any questions that you have for our presenter using the Q&A feature. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I want to introduce today's session, the title of which, like I mentioned, is Building Partnerships with Families, Breaking Down Barriers. And we're really excited today to be joined for this session by Cindy Kauffman from SEEC, a professional with 40 years of experience in the field of developmental disability services. Cindy currently serves as Director of Strategic Operations for Silver Spring, Maryland-based SEEC, and Anchor is grateful to have SEEC as one of our members. They're one of the leading providers in Maryland, and we're especially grateful to have Cindy on today's session. So Cindy, I will stop sharing my screen and turn things over to you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Building Partnerships with Families. Before we start today, I do want to let you know that partway through the presentation later, I'm going to introduce 2 other people that I'd like to have you hear from, Dante and Lenny. But I want to let you know that we are sharing the same space, and in doing so, while they're not speaking, they are wearing masks, gloves, and we have sanitizer and everything else around us, and we're sitting at least 6 feet apart. So when they come up to the table, it may be a little bit of a transition here. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Okay. Why is partnering with families critical to our work? When I start today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a story. And the story is about my sister, Deborah. Deborah and I were little girls together, and I was probably about 6 years old for most of what I remember. My mom and dad had Deborah, and she had quite a few diagnoses and many complications and developmental disabilities. Mom and Dad, I can remember working really hard to have Deborah at home with us and always asking if there was any place to get some help, whether it was nurses, doctors, or just resources in general. When she was about 4 years old, the family doctor basically said to her that he would not serve her anymore. Everybody had told her that Deborah needed to be in an institution. So finally, my mom and dad said, no one will help us. We don't have a choice. So Deborah was moved about 3 hours away. And during that time, I can remember a picnic basket and a blanket, and mom and dad and Deborah and I sitting out on the grounds at the state hospital. Those grounds were beautiful. I remember the very green grass and rolling hills, and really enjoying those a couple picnics that we were on. But I also remember going to the porch and refusing to go inside. And my mom always told me that the inside scared me and that it was very dark, and that I remember. So that's what I remember about my Deborah and living there. What I also remember about Deborah is she was out there about 6 months before she passed away. My mom to this day asked me why there weren't any supports available to help a family. We've come a long way since then, but you all know we face a growing workforce shortage. COVID-19 in particular has changed the way all of us are doing business. We have some isolation going on. We have fear, illness, essential workforce issues, and think of our essential workforce. They have their own issues. In childcare, they may have lost their childcare. They may have lost jobs in the family. The shortages of food and the same products that we're missing out on. And they may have their own ill family members to take care of. So we recognize the additional stressors that are there. What we also know today is that families often remain an untapped and unsupported resource for us. As I talk today, there are a couple things I'd like to go over in particular. One is what we all know, challenges for providers in our service system. I'd like to talk about our SEEC strategic planning process and the lessons that we learn from families and how important they are in our strategic plan for the future. I also want to talk about creating a forum for family partnerships. We'll take a look at supporting purposeful partnerships that are good for the people that we support. And then I'd like to spend some time looking at some of the tools that we've developed at SEEC in support of these partnerships that we work hard on. Today we see a broken system. That system will not take us easily into the future. As providers, we're asking fewer DSPs to do a whole lot more work and very different work. We don't ask them to be caretakers anymore. We ask them to be supporters and coaches and transport and teachers. And we're expecting a lot out of the people that there just aren't enough there. Okay. We also today can do a lot of complaining. We can complain about not having enough money, about not having enough highly skilled DSPs, but we already know that's not a solution to our issues. At least it's not a viable solution. We need to recognize that no one else is going to fix our dilemma. It's up to all of us, and we say it to each other all the time. For the most part, excuse me, I think about the lack of resources, and in some ways we all have them. And I go back to when I worked, when I started in the field in rural Pennsylvania, in a place that we would call the hollows, or actually called the haulers. And at that time, there was a community health nurse, and there was me, a case manager, in this very rural and relatively poor area. When we'd go into these hollers, we would work with families that had babies with developmental disabilities. And one of the things I learned very early on is that these families and their babies, if they were lucky, they got to Philadelphia or Pittsburgh maybe once a year and got to see the professionals and specialists that they needed to. So it was a grand day for them when they went. They got this help. They had OTs, PTs, speech pathologists, everyone working with them, but then they came home to no one. The community health nurse and I just weren't trained to be the therapists that they needed. The families became the specialist for those babies. And as we look at today, we're so much better off and much luckier. But again, if we look at the tomorrow for the future, are we going to stay that much better off without families? For tomorrow, not just families, but we need to look at disrupting everything that we do or our service system as it is. We need to see the technology. So the wonderful presentation from Brian yesterday on some of the crazy, exciting technology that they're building in the pilot. But certainly technology in our future has greater uses. We need to find, develop, and coordinate resources. A lot of resources are there and they're overwhelming to negotiate. In some cases, there aren't the resources. How do we develop those? How do we negotiate flexible resources and services so that it meets the needs of people? How do we bridge the gap with staff? How do we reteach staff to fill the holes that need to be filled in the way that will work for people? And to me, quite important is how do we partner with families to build and sustain lifelong relationships? The next thing I'd like to touch on is SEEC and how we're getting to where we are going, and to spend a minute on our strategic thinking. We have, over the course of a couple years, we engaged in a strategic thinking process that has resulted in 4 pillars, and that these efforts will take us over the next year into the next 10 years. And one of those things is the workforce. We recognize that with our workforce, it's critical that we look at how we recruit, how we hire, and how we retain them. How do we motivate staff to stay with us? The other thing we found as a priority is financial diversity. We have a tendency to rely, many of us, on one funding source, whether it be a public funds, which most often is, but we recognize the shortcomings in that, partly because we can't do everything we want to do, and partly because, heaven forbid, anything happens and that dries up. What do we do? Navigation and planning is simply that we recognize there are resources everywhere, and in some cases there's a dearth of resources. And how do we help people that we support both find those resources and then figure out how to use them? Within SEEC ourselves, we know we can be a complicated organization. How do we help people understand what there is and how to use our expertise and resources the best? And then finally, we see about families, the partnerships. Partnerships are not just with families, they're with corporations, they're external, they're internal. But what we will focus on today is the critical importance of families in our partnership development. One of the things we know about families is that really tough families and really easy families can take up a lot of our time. One type exhausts us and one type energizes us. When I think about that, I think of a father that we used to call Sergeant, and I hoping to this day that he didn't know we called him Sergeant. But he was ex-military, and he treated us as he probably did as whatever his role was in the military. But we never made him happy. He would request meeting after meeting. He would go to the governor. He would threaten to sue us. He would demand changes in services, and we tried every time we changed services. And what we found out over time is that we really never benefited him as a father, and what he perceived as no benefit to his son. At the same time, I remember Brenda and having probably 1.5 million cups of coffee at Brenda's kitchen table. And the reason I would go in there, or when I went go in there, Brenda and her son would both smile. They'd light up when I walked into that house. And one of the reasons I had 1 million cups of coffee is because it made me feel good being there. In spite of whatever my worst or my best could be, they were going to make it. They were going to succeed with or without me, but they made me feel good. And so I found that at times in my life, I spent a lot of time with either one of those kinds of families. The ones that really needed my time and exhausted us, or the ones that made me feel energetic. And so I spent the time there. What I didn't do and really learned and continue to focus on that to this day is there's 80% of those other families in there that would benefit from my time, my support, getting to know them and building partnerships with them. And that's what I hope we do from here into the future. The other thing we need to recognize with families is that look at the crisis we have now. Families for us have been invaluable. They've been stepping up, helping out, filling in the staff time whenever we can't get staff to them, or when they say, nobody in my house, give me some support and I will do what I need to do at home. They've welcomed some DSPs into their homes. They've helped to reinforce the work of the DSPs. They've sent us supplies. They've sent out a lot of cards of thanks, making masks for us, and just doing everything they can to try and be our partners. But as we look beyond the crises that we're in right now, we also have to recognize that families have been around the person with disabilities a whole lot longer in most cases than we have. They know the person in ways that we may never know them. They probably know better the person's story, their dreams, their fears. Families are potential resources that they sometimes don't even know they are. At times, it may be with money. Other times, it might be that they know people they didn't realize they even knew until we explore that. Those people end up being resources, whether it's Joe the grocer, the hairdresser, a neighbor that bakes, the kid down the street that really likes the son or daughter and would love to spend time with them. They help us find resources. And again, families will likely be around a lot longer than us. No matter how much we're committed to their son, daughter, brother, sister, whoever it is, we probably won't be in that person's life as long as they will be. When we look at building these partnerships with families, we recognize that we need some sort of foundation to work from. And so we found a gazillion things out there about building relationships and how to do that well. But we settled on 4 that we think work for us and they kind of hold us to that steady. Are we doing this? One is family-centered. The need to recognize that family is part of the equation, whether their adult child lives at home, on their own, or with a provider. One is communication, that we always need to assess, is it too little? Is it too much? Are we being positive? Are we being too negative? Are we being honest? And how do we balance that in promoting good communication with families? Empathy is a big one for us. It's about us letting a family know that we're trying to understand and acknowledge their unique family situation. We're not trying to fix them, and we're not trying to change them. And along with empathy, respect needs to be there. Respecting the family's own diversity in how they operate, how they live, and how they make decisions. We believe that when these components are present, strong relationships and partnerships can and do grow. At the same time we're working on foundations with families, we need to acknowledge that families face dilemmas. All of us are part of families somewhere along the line. And then we look at families that we tend to be working with, and that's having a member with disabilities. In order to build these partnerships, certain things may be in place, a natural progression. Many families raise their children until they start a life on their own. Parents of some people with disabilities don't have that, may not have that expectation. There are times as a natural mistrust, or maybe not a natural mistrust, but one that has certainly grown out of experiences with services and staff. I think about years ago, many years ago, when I first worked in Baltimore, I was at the Kennedy Krieger Institute, and I was real full of myself because I was doing home visits. And my first visit to what we would call the projects in Baltimore was quite an experience for me. I can remember getting out of my car and walking into this open courtyard, and there were some people milling about the courtyard, maybe 5 or 8 people, and nobody looked at me. Nobody acknowledged me, kind of turned their backs on me, but I could tell I was being stared at. So I did my thing. I went into the building that I was supposed to, knocked on the apartment door of this woman. She opened it, very quiet, very tentative. And after 5-10 minutes of me talking to her, trying to get to know her, helping her to see that we were there to try and give her support and do what we could with her son, she asked me if I wanted a glass of water. Speaking of which, excuse me a second. And I said yes, and she went over to the sink, and she's getting me a glass of water, and she reaches up to her window, and she pulls this funny looking plate off the window and sets it on the counter. So I didn't think a thing of it. I had my water, we finished our talk, and we kind of ended being, the start of a friendship, or at least a relationship, but it was good. And we talked about the next time I would be out and how I'd get in touch with her. So as I walked out and back through the courtyard, I saw a couple of these 5 or 8 people, maybe about 5 of them were still left. And I got this, hello, or bye, miss, see you next time, have a good day. And all of a sudden people were talking to me. So I went back to my office and feeling pretty darn good about myself. I was talking to a social worker and explaining my experience. And she started laughing and she said, oh, I bet you got the old plate in the window, didn't you? And evidently that was their way of communicating to people that you don't need to be on guard. This was okay. The only reason that plate was there, though, is because people had learned not to mistrust others that might come into their homes. We also know that families experience stress. Parents have reminded us that at every transition in their lives, there are stresses of additional planning and doing for their member with disabilities and how everything's going to impact them. Parents have also taught us and explained to us that there is at times despair and fear. What happens as family members grow older and are no longer able to help? Who will protect and care for their member with disabilities, especially when they can't even find the staff now that they need? We meet too many families that are in their 70s and have no idea what will happen when they cannot provide the care and support anymore. But with those dilemmas, families have also told us very clearly, they have a lot of hope. They have hope for us that as a service system, we'll get our act together and keep growing and getting better. They've told us that they dream of bright futures for their family, for their members with disabilities. They believe that they have much to add to the planning and supporting of their family members. And they believe they have things to add to the providers, to the systems that are evolving, and to other families. So how do we do this at SEEC? How it's gone for us so far is hopefully we've learned a lot. We went full steam ahead in a lot of different ways, often in the wrong direction. We taught staff that person-centered is the only good way to go, that you had to focus on that person and what they wanted in their life is what you fought for. Unfortunately, we forgot to include the fact that families were part of that. And so in pushing and advocating for the person, we at times, quite often, advocated against the family and pushed them away. We have many bright ideas. We're really good at what we do. We have a lot of specialty, a lot of experience, and we have very high expectations of the people that we support. We try to teach families these ideas, and we pushed them as hard as we could because we knew what we were doing. We didn't ask for their dreams and fears about new ideas. We just pushed. We advocated for that person, but as I said, often against the family. But we did some good things too. We're learning to talk with families and advocate for them. At the same time, we're getting to know the family and being a support to them. I think of Susan, a young woman that I worked with off and on for a long time. And I remember Susan telling us as staff that she really wanted to date Tony. Her mom, her dad said, no way, no, ever, she's not dating, it's just not going to happen. So instead of trying to fight that issue because Susan wanted to date Tony, we talked with the family, but we mostly talked with Susan and helped her communicate to her family, I want friends. And the family got that. And we're like, well, I want you to have friends too. So they jumped in and they helped her figure out when some people's birthdays were and send them a card, hosted little get-togethers so that friends could come in. The next thing we knew, of course, Tony was one of those friends. And a couple years later, I can tell you that Susan and Tony are dating, and they have clearly a girlfriend and boyfriend relationship that they're very proud of. We would not have gotten there probably had we done what we did in the past, and that's at all cost advocate for the person, regardless of what the family felt. We also have learned that we have to reach out in different ways. We used to think it was pretty good when we sent an annual survey to families and got their satisfaction about services. We know that that gave us very little. Since then, we try to work on ways to reach different families in different ways. We have groups, we have education programs, we have the website that we think every month does a better job at reaching out and does a fantastic work. Phone calls. With the crisis we're in now, the use of virtual meetings and virtual reaching out and virtual cooking shows and exercise and everything. Call-ins with our CEO, families to call in and ask the CEO questions. There's no end to the different kinds of activities we're trying to do and find some success with. I'm going to explain a couple of the things that have resulted in tools in our efforts. I would love to be able to share the exact tools with you today, but because I will be I'll be sending Anchor the overheads for this, I will be able to send links to all of these tools, but you'll also have my email. So if there are any of these tools that you would like more information on or to have copies to use, I'd be happy to share them with you. The first tool that I'd like to talk about is, I don't know that it's a tool as much as it's a thing that's been developed, but we call it the Parent Think Team. And it's not just another parent group, but we always worried about parents, several of which are joining me today, so I have to be very optimistic about this, which I am. I'm very excited. But there were certain families that we worked with that seemed to easily criticize us or had opinions on many things. They seemed to create a tension sometimes between family and staff, and generally felt like we always had to answer them, not always in bad ways, just like they could make me feel that I wasn't smart enough to handle their answers or something. But what we figured out is, because we tried to avoid some of these situations or just make the family happy, that we were missing out and losing on the richness of what these families could offer us. So we decided to very consciously flip our perception as to how we looked at many of these families, and used our foundation that I talked about earlier with communication and respect and empathy, and really looked at a different way. How can we engage these families to work with us? Out of this reversal, we saw an opportunity to hear these vocal parents, be open with them about our issues, and maybe solve some problems along the way. And basically, we ended up with a parent group of families that have challenged us ever since, and in a way that we celebrate. Just whenever I was preparing to talk to you all, I asked the Parent Think Team, what made this different from a parent group? And you see the list there that we came up with together. And then just to mention a couple of the priorities. One of the big things was agency staff are willing to share the nuts and bolts and guts of the agency. And that is not easy to do, to be open and honest about this is what we're really facing. But along with that sentence, and I don't know that I put it in here, was I remember the family saying to me, this is not for weak staff. that you have to have staff that can come in and not crawl under the table, which I felt like doing sometimes, and to embrace and enjoy the frank, open conversations that we had. That they said that agency staff truly need to listen and are not defensive or shying away, and that the group is supported by each other, the staff and the families together, that the conversations are candid, they're open, they're pointed, sometimes a little loud, but they're done with such kindness and respect. That's our uniqueness of this parent think team. Something else I'd like to share with you is what we call our service agreement. I don't know about how many of you, and some of you probably have wonderful upfront agreements when you sit down with the person that you're going to support and the families. But we really struggled with a good agreement that said, families, this is what we're going to be able to offer. Your family member telling the person that this is what they'll get from us. This is what you can expect from our staff. This is what we hope to expect from you. And no matter how much talking we did up front, we didn't have a good tool for laying that out. So we engaged on this service agreement, and we actually, our parent think team had an awful lot to do with its evolution. But I shared a little page with you here, but the full tool has different topics like tips and best practices for our partnership together. The partnership agreement, like I said, what you can expect from us, what we hope to expect from you. There's a component on staff matching. The degree that we're able, we try to get staff that match the expectations of your family member or of you in looking for services. So we're certainly not going to pair a little lady that likes to sit down and read her novels and watch soaps and play games on the computer with your family member that likes NASCAR and football games and everything, outside playing basketball. We also do services and resources, and we have an ending statement of respect and of a zero tolerance for abuse and non-negotiables. This, I will tell you, it sounds good, and it sounds like this has evolved very well, and we're very proud of this service agreement. This has been by far the hardest tool I think we have worked on at SEEC, and mainly because we thought we did a really good job. The staff are saying we're being very positive, this is being constructive. Our parent think team looked at it and said, you're being mean and bullies. So it took us almost 2 years for this thing to evolve, but at this point we're quite proud of it. What I'd like to do is also, oops. There. And I'm going to take a minute here. I'd like to turn for a minute, and I skipped a page. That's why, because I thought I need Dante to come up here right now. I still, there it is. Okay. You see Ben's life trajectory up here. To some of you, this may look familiar if you know life course framework tools at all. But at this point, I would like to do a little transition, and I'm going to grab my mask and stuff. Dante is going to take hers off, and she's going to join you for a few minutes. Dante Allen is both a staff member at SEEC and a parent, and I'd like her to share with you a little bit. Dante?
Good afternoon, everyone. Cindy asked me to share my family perspective with you, but I also have a professional perspective to share with you as well. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Dante Allen, and I serve as the assistant to the executive director at SEEC, as well as the Parents of Parent Program Coordinator. And I also serve on the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families, and I'm a Maryland Life Course Framework Ambassador. I also recently completed the Maryland Partners in Policymaking Program through the ARC Maryland. So that gives you a little bit of background as for my professional status. But given all that background information, I'm here because my journey within SEEC began as a mother seeking support and guidance through the Parent-to-Parent program. The Parent-to-Parent program is a nationwide program that provides peer support matches to families raising a child with a disability to another parent with either a similar diagnosis or that lives in the same geographical region. This support at SEEC was really helpful to me for alleviating isolation and feeling empowered to overcome the stigma of disability, as well as to understand what my community's resources were. So it's designed to do that for all parents that we provide support to. And in my experience, it was this connection that I was introduced into the disability services. And that recognition and that work has also helped me in being a reciprocal role as a mother raising a son with a disability. So the evolution into the life course framework is that I use my unique lens as a family member to advocate with my colleagues as we provide supports to people to live and thrive in their communities. This life course framework has ignited my passion toward advocating for people's lives so that they're meaningful and productive, but for all people, not just the person with a disability, but for the family member that's providing support and nurturing that person within the community. So that advocacy and through working at SEEC, it led me to the life course framework, which is a core set of principles and values that are important when thinking about what it means to support people with disabilities and their families to have good lives. So it's not just about the person with the disability. It begins with the family because the person exists within the context of that family. So I've used the life course framework in a variety of different ways in my work with SEEC. I've used it to create a customized tool, a one-page profile that we've begun using in our pre-planning for our annual person-centered plans for people we support. Most recently, I also began using the life course framework tools with our staff to be used on a person that we provide supports to should they require a hospital stay during this current COVID quarantine. And on Thursday at 5 p.m., I'll be giving a family webinar to kind of explain that tool to families so that they can use them to customize their own profile for their family member should they require hospitalization. In a reciprocal way, I've also used the knowledge and skill set from the life course framework for my own personal life. I've customized the life course framework for IEP meetings and found that the tools help create really meaningful and robust conversations with the school staff at my son's school. And in that way, it resulted in enhanced supports at his school in a way that is really customized to bring out the best with him. My son's school has even asked me to create a workshop for families receiving special education services that uses the tool because they felt that they were able to gather more information from our one IEP meeting using that tool than through the bulk of the documents that are listed in the IEP. So I'm using what I'm learning professionally and also enhancing myself and my family personally. And those connections have really helped with how I'm able to help with the wider community and helping my peers and people that I run into or families that I know through the Parent-to-Parent network. It helps me to engage with them in a deeper, more meaningful way. And given all of that, I feel like I have a front row seat now into seeing how to build effective family partnerships, and that's through my work at SEEC. Many of our SEEC board members are parents or a sibling of a person receiving supports through our services, and it's through their partnership that even recently we were able to exceed our online fundraising campaign because the families that we support see how much that we are working hard for them and providing really, really good supports to their family member and that we really want to see them thrive in this community. So family partnerships are vital to SEEC as they enhance the quality of supports that we provide. So thank you for listening, and I just wanted to give my small perspective. Have a good afternoon.
I'm back. Thank you, Dante.
Sure.
Happy to hear from you, and thanks for agreeing. meet with us. Okay. I want to mention another tool before I ask Lenny to join us for a couple minutes. And it is because this tool leads up and to the point that Lenny has become a historical part in some ways of SEEC, but is also quite an inspiration to many of the things that we work on. And this tool in particular is new. It's something that we're piloting, and it's based on a learning cycle. And it is happening through a grant through the ARC Maryland. And there are quite a few of us working on it that is really taking the concepts of side-by-side learning, where we're working on the concept of greater independence and moving. The first time that somebody moves out of their family home, which was probably daunting for any one of us. I remember it well, and it was quite some time ago. I remember having my little car packed up and with all my stuff in it and tears in my eyes saying, I'm really moving out. And then I got down the street and it was like, and I'm really moving out. Sorry, Mom. But the side-by-side learning concept we thought would be very important, because we know that the issue of independence and people moving out of their home it can be overwhelming, both to the person that is moving and to the family. So that is this. It's a 9-month project basically that we're piloting. And this is sort of the concept or the thoughts that we have behind it, that we help people learn about building a circle of support. That circle of support helps look at your story, your dreams, your nightmares, the resources that you're going to need as you move forward in your life. You create a plan. Dante mentioned the life course framework. At SEEC, we're very, very much into graphic plans. We try not to do a lot of narrative, a lot of words in the planning that we do, because we find pictures help us all more. We answer questions that come up as we're doing the planning, find resources, secure those resources, and when we have all those ducks in a row, it's time to move out. What we find with people is that is probably a minimum of a 3 month process to maybe 2 or more years. Given that, I would like Lenny to join us, Lenny Gladstone, and share a little bit about Scott, who her son happens to be on the cover of our Moving Out Guide. And we will take another transition here while I move out.
So Cindy moved out and I'm moving in. Hi, my name is Lenny Gladstone. I am Scott's mom, who you see, I think you see up there. I am a board member. I work in the disability community at one of the non-public schools here in the area. I did not do this professionally until later in Scott's life, when I realized I had learned a lot and maybe I could provide some assistance to other families as well. Scott is a young man. He's now 31. He has autism, he has Crohn's, he has a seizure disorder, and he has some very challenging behaviors. And when he started with SEEC, they were helping us during day supports, and they were learning maybe a little late in the game, learning a little more about him, that he was a little more challenging than they might have thought. But it was, I think, a lot of the transition from Scott being at school to being out in the community with SEEC. And so what we realized pretty quickly, and also just to give you a little more background, I'm a widow. And I think SEEC really took a look at that and said, though they never told me this, they said, our job is to not only support this individual, our job is to support this family. And I think that they thought, we have to get him out of this house before he gets hurt or she gets hurt, meaning me. I was very surprised when they came to me because he was only about 24. I think in my head, I thought maybe he would get some kind of residential supports maybe in his 30s. So I was a little surprised when they came to me and said, essentially, we would like to use you as a guinea pig. And I thought, okay, really? I think they thought I was the right parent as SEEC was beginning to develop a new residential model. SEEC does not have group homes. They don't support that many people in the community, in residential settings. And they really wanted to create a setting where it was really customized for the family and for the person. What does the person want? How does the family match into this so that SEEC would be able to create what the family feels comfortable with? And we investigated together what we thought Scott's best setting would be. SEEC held my hand as we tried to figure out what should his home look like. Should it be an apartment? Should it be a townhouse? Should it be a house? I didn't know, and I hadn't really thought about this, but they worked this through with me from very, very, very small details to much more overriding a path for Scott. It was really a team approach. They supported me, and I remember having coffee with Cindy one day thinking, well, we'll sit for about an hour. I think we got up about 4 hours later. It was the beginning of Scott's process, and we fleshed out what you really saw in your last slide. We sort of talked about all of those individual levels of how to best support a family and best support the individual as they are moving out. That did not exist when we did this. We sort of, as a team, put this together. He has now been in his own home for about 6 years. It has looked different from time to time, but SEEC has given me the opportunity to, and Scott, the opportunity to decide who we wanted to support Scott, what we wanted the house to look like. And Scott, though he's fairly nonverbal, he talks. He just doesn't want to talk to you. And you have a million of these people in your agencies. But he began to feel comfortable enough to make it very clear who he liked, who he didn't like. It has been fascinating opportunity for all of us, and I thank SEEC immensely for what we've been able to accomplish. Thank you.
Takes longer to walk about 7 or 8 feet than I had thought it would. Sorry about that. As we thank you, Lenny and Dante both. I just think you add a richness that I can't give people in the same way. But to wrap up, I'd like to look at sharing with you what we think some lessons are that we've learned. What we've learned is there is no magic bullet or magic answer. What works for us may not work for anyone else, but we're hoping some of these little pieces of information serve as nuggets that you might want to expand on or share with us what works better for you. It only makes sense to provide support to those that are lifetime connections, no matter how much, and we have so many direct support staff that get really close to the people they support. The reality is most of them are not there for the person's lifetime. I remember being a vice president in one of my other former years or jobs, vice president at CQL at one time. And one of the earliest things I learned that stuck with me was the data on health and safety. And it was very clear that the people that had family in their lives and natural supports had many more times present health and safety outcomes in their lives than those that did not. It's only appropriate that we foster that ability for people to have those outcomes. Investing in family partnerships just may help DSPs make connections and stay in the field longer. We may keep them. Helping DSPs to see the value in building partnerships with families, we already know makes better supports to people with disabilities. Building family and provider partnerships starts changing our systems paradigm, one that may be sustainable in the future. We will likely, and I know for a fact, we will continue to make mistakes, but we see that as a good thing. We try to anyway. And as long as we make mistakes, learn from those, reset in those mistakes, and try again, we think we're doing the right things. So where do we go from here? We celebrate the joint efforts and successes. We don't do that enough. It's something we need to focus on. We need to get better at it all the time. And I leave you with, the current crisis presents a unique opportunity for a do-over like we've never had before. So what are we all going to do about it? I want to thank you for your time and attention. And I don't know if there are any questions, but my email address is here. If it's tools or any information that you want, I would be happy to share that with you. And again, I can't thank you enough for the hour that you've spent with me. Sean?
Thank you so much, Cindy. And we do have several questions for you. I don't know if we'll be able to get through all of them, but I will certainly track the ones that we don't get to answer so that way we can follow up after the fact. So the first question comes from Jason Parks, and I'm actually going to combine two of his questions. First, he asks, is it safe to assume that you employ the informed decision-making process? And second, he asks, do you use the PATH plan with/for person-centered planning in including everyone as a team of support for the person and what they want to achieve in their life?
If I understood everything correctly, that yes, I mean, informed decision-making is very important. It's something that we talk about quite a bit. The plan, the path that we take in planning, and I'm assuming I'm leaning toward the graphic piece that you're talking about, but also that the circle of support that I had mentioned is that the person decides who's part of that circle. So we work with the family and with the person there. And frankly, there have been a time or two through the years where a person said, I do not want my family part of that process. And we try to work it out, but we listen ultimately to the person. They define who that circle is or who that support team is.
Great, thank you. Mark Meyer has the next question, and he asks, how do you engage families if the support recipient is their own guardian, or if they have state guardianship but do have involvement in decision-making? And then he also asks, if families are involved in planning, then how do you deal with potential HIPAA-related issues?
Again, I think it goes back to the first question. None of this is done in lieu of talking with the person. The guardianship issue is if someone doesn't have guardianship papers, the family member, whomever, is the person that we deal with. We would never invite the family into a meeting or anything else if it wasn't something that we talked about with the person. I go back to the first question, which is, this is about respect for the person. And when I talk about person-centeredness, that's at the heart. We just believe very strongly we can be person-centered and family-centered at the same time.
Great. Next, is a question from Nikki Starebo, and she wants to know if it's possible to get a copy of the service agreement document so that we can see what all is included in that document.
Yes, yes, I'd be happy to do that. I will attach a link whenever I send the PowerPoint for Anchor to post it. But I also, if you have my email and you want to interact directly, we can send it to you that way too.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we're planning to have all of our materials and everything uploaded to the community library in the Anchor Connected community. So, you know, if folks want to avoid inundating Cindy with requests, we promise to have that up just as soon as we can, but we appreciate you giving us a few days to pull it all together. The next question is from Mary Patton, who says that this sounds like it's clearly beneficial for all agencies. And so she's curious if it is possible to open chapters of SEC in other states.
Karen, if you're listening, you answer that question. We have a board member here. I can ask her. We are very proud of our organization. We're very proud of the fact that we try to look at what's going on now and always looking forward. We're a bunch of strategic thinkers that believe we have to get there by including the people we support and the families that are working with us. So yeah, I mean, that's something I'm gonna, once we're done, we're gonna go have that discussion actually. Right.
Morgan Heckford, who lives in Montana, says that their families may live up to 4 hours driving distance away. And so wants to know, how have you overcome the challenges of helping more rural families feel connected and part of a partnership with the agency when face-to-face services are often cost prohibitive?
I think that's such a good question. I'm a little spoiled where we are. I'm in Montgomery County. In Maryland, which is not a rural county at all, is a resource rich and public transportation rich area. But when I first started in many ways, whether it was the Eastern Shore of Maryland or Appalachia areas in Pennsylvania, that I think I mentioned that we may have had the annual trip to some of the specialty areas with families. It was about helping them have a connection close by, even if they might not physically be able to get to the service center or the place that they can access all the resources. Especially now, their virtual relationships, we found can be very powerful, and we're using them more and more. I think up until about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I did everything I could to avoid a virtual anything. And here we are today. So there are many ways, but they're not easy. We recognize that the resource questions are different if you're in a rural area than a suburban or metropolitan area.
Great, and we have several more questions, but only really time for one more. So I'm gonna ask the last question from Cindy Gages. Sorry, Cindy, if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but she wants to know, what was the procedure for Scott's transition? Did he move out slowly? Was it, 2 days and then 3 and then so on? Or did he move out fully from day one? And is this something that the parents and SEEC figure out for each individual, or is there kind of a set process for everyone?
There is not a set process for everyone. I think that when I showed the arrow, that is so intensive up front because we're talking about individually what needs to happen. And I can bring Lenny back up, but time-wise, I'm a little concerned. But one of the things she has said to us over and over, and she will talk to any family that's contemplating working with their child, their adult member to move out, and that is, before they ever move, get that staff to come into the house and spend time so that at least that part of the transition starts feeling a little more natural. And then you do it accordingly. For some people, it's like, okay, I have my apartment, my house, I'm out of here. For most people, it's not. Let's go hang out during the day. Let's hang out for the weekend. Let's hang out for a week or two. But it is being very flexible with that staff and getting them with that person and family early on.
Great, thank you. Well, I hate to cut off a good discussion, but I do want to just wrap up with a couple of reminders for everyone. So as a reminder, this session is one of several that is part of Anchor's 2020 Virtual Annual Conference Week, which continues tomorrow and Thursday with virtual office hours from Anchor's Platinum and Gold partners. So be sure to visit the conference website at anchor.org/2020conference to learn more about that. Also, as a reminder, if you are interested in the recording of today's presentation or any of the other recordings from the conference that you might have missed, or any of the slides and materials, those are going to be made available shortly in the next couple of days via the Anchor Connected community. And finally, if you are in need of a certificate of attendance for documenting your participation in this or any other sessions, please note that the information about how to request those certificates of attendance will be made available in the coming days. So all of that having been said, I want to just offer my thanks once again to Cindy and her entire team for a wonderful presentation today. And I wish to see all of you back here tomorrow and Thursday for the remainder of our virtual annual conference week. Take care and have a great rest of your afternoon.